Howdy-o, what do you know, it is Rabbit, and we're back to fixing Baldur's Gate 3 feats as shown in my top 10 lists. I'm going to keep ascending up this list with the most underwhelming feats that I found in BG3. I'd love to fix these so they're not too dull or weak, but this is about not overpowering these feats first and foremost. We're just trying to put them in the running. If you haven't seen my most underwhelming feats in BG3 list, check that out right up there in the top right corner, and a bundle of other things in the description. Also, there will be spoilers, obviously, so keep that in mind, especially since we're going from the lowest scoring feat and working progressively along the list. Let's get to work. Number 1, Medium Armor Master. In the golden days of yore, when the peach cobbler was fresh out of the oven, Wizards of the Coast elected to showcase what a master of combat in medium armor could do. It turns out they were slightly less clunky and slightly more elusive than the average person, but not more sneaky or elusive than a sneaky, elusive person wearing inferior armor would have been. In my opinion, Medium Armor Master gave to a select few classes a weaker or equivalent version of the things that make light armor so desirable without a master feat. Medium Armor Master is a horrendously dumb feat, though it didn't quite make it for our worst feats video way back when, link in the description. Last video I actually made a quote-unquote number X feat entitled Light Armor Master that took advantage of the speed you might have in armor and the somewhat better defenses afforded a person wearing light armor. It helped you avoid opportunity attacks that would still bypass regular clothing even on a glancing blow, and gave you a little bit of an extra caveat in avoiding ground-based hazards. This time I want to revamp perhaps the lamest feats, weak-ass portrayal. Let's see what I came up with. You gain +1 to either strength, dexterity, or constitution up to a maximum of 20. Medium armor you wear doesn't impose disadvantage on stealth checks. You gain a stacking +1 bonus to armor class. This bonus persists while in a druid animal or elemental form. Once per turn per attack, when you deal unarmed damage, damage with natural weapons, or you use a charging attack, which is an attack that has you moving and striking using your actions, you add your proficiency bonus to the damage dealt, or deal damage equal to your proficiency bonus as non-lethal damage after all other effects of the attack are resolved. It's weird, but technically making this a half feat would have solved the issue on paper. The sad thing is, it's still not even close to the best option you could take in BG3 with the massive item synergies and manipulation you can pull off in this game. This keeps things in line with the Light Armor Master feat, lets strength-based toons not have to invest so heavily into dexterity to make ends meet, and it actually gives a bonus to the couple characters who would use medium armor, those being barbarians and druids mainly. And conveniently, these two classes would also do unarmed or charge attacks. Monks can't really play ball with this one admittedly, but they've already got so much going for unarmed strikes. Let's let the Barbies and Shapeshifters have this one. Number 1, also, moderately armored. We dealt with this in the previous video in this series, so please check that out to see what we did. The feat we made was called Garden and applied to all the armored feat line, so let's go ahead and skip to number 2, Magic Initiate Bard. Oh jeez, we're back on the many Magic Initiate feats, each of which is slightly less interesting than the one that came before it. I could apply a blanket fix to each one of these, but I want all of them to stand out and be unique amongst their peers without twisting things too much. Now as I'm writing this, I'm kicking myself for starting from the bottom since the topmost ones are clearly the superior options and would kind of inform these lower tiers. But you can't have your cake and a lollipop at the same time, as the saying goes, I think. Well, to me, the worst part of these feats is that I had to figure out what each one gave again. I'll throw on a small caveat here because this will apply to every single one of these Magic Initiate feats upcoming. Your initiate checks use your highest spellcasting modifier between Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma for their checks, if they have any. Magic Initiate Bard is a tough one amongst tough feats. I put this one here because it had the smallest spell list with the fewest unique options, 0 unique options in fact. If you chose other spell lists, you'd cover every great spelling cantrip this feat list has to offer. Let's try this on for size. You learn 2 cantrips of your choosing from the Bard spell list. Whenever you gain your 6th and then your 12th level, you learn an additional cantrip of your choosing from the Bard spell list. These cantrips scale as usual. You gain 2 level 1 spells from the Bard spell list. You gain 2 level 1 initiate spell slots to fuel these spells, which increase to level 2 spell slots at character level 7, as if you were a 1/3 caster. These spell slots restore on a long rest as usual, and are in addition to any spell slots you may already have. Your initiate spells use your spellcasting modifier for their checks if they have any. Choose between enchantment, evocation, and illusion. Spells of this school that you cast are upcast as if they were the lower of 3 or 1/3 of your character level, regardless of which spell slot you use to fuel them. We're clearly setting a precedent, but you can see what we did there. This actually makes the feat, or rather the entire chain of feats, specifically geared for the 2 1/3 casters in the game, the Eldritch Knight and the Arcane Trickster. And I might add, those 2 subclasses stand as 2 of the worst in BG3 currently, so you gotta ask yourself, how awesome would it be if they had a bit of help? Aside from that, expanding the initiate feat chain into more cantrip and level 1 spells, and interestingly, even bumping those spells a bit in a particular school, or just based on your level, allows us to hide how similar some of these lists are, because now you don't have to stress about choosing that one spell or cantrip that'll make a list worth taking. Items rule BG3 at the moment. Let's take some of that ground back with these feats. On to the next though, and you'll probably notice a pattern immediately. Number 3, Magic Initiate Sorcerer. Sorcerer was like a worse wizard in terms of its Magic Initiate feat. Wizard covered everything poor Sorc could muster, so we'd have to do something similar with that last snippet I covered in the previous feat. Let's see what's up. You learn 2 cantrips from the Sorcerer spell list. When you gain your 6th and then your 12th level, you learn an additional cantrip from the Sorcerer spell list of your choosing. These cantrips scale as usual. You gain 2 level 1 spells from the Sorcerer spell list. You gain 2 level 1 initiate spell slots to fuel these spells, which increase to level 2 spell slots at character level 7, as if you were a 1/3 caster. These spell slots restore on a long rest as usual, and are in addition to any spell slots you may already have. Your initiate spells use your spellcasting modifier for their checks, if they have any. Choose between Conjuration, Enchantment, and Evocation. Spells of this school that you cast are upcast as if they were the lower of 3 or 1/3 of your character level, regardless of which spell slot you use to fuel them. Sorcerer has the unfortunate bonus of being the lamest of the Magic Initiate feats now, but with the general improvements to this feat and the choice of which spells are upcast, it can still find play. What's more, it carries the sought-after Conjuration tag that Wizard lacks, though the 2 are still very similar because, unfortunately, they're just so damn similar in the 5e system that I'd have to make things up to break them up much further. Still, it has a place in the MI setup now, rather than being wholly outdone by MI Wizard. Number 4, Magic Initiate Druid. Druid gets a massive improvement here since it's not really a standout feat either. Thankfully, that's the last time I'll be saying that, since we're getting closer to the best MI feats. Still, we have to remedy this one because I don't want to see Druid play second fiddle to anyone, even if it happens to do that all of the time. You learn 2 cantrips from the Druid spell list. When you gain your 6th and then your 12th level, you learn an additional cantrip from the Druid spell list of your choosing. These cantrips scale as usual. You gain 2 level 1 spells from the Druid spell list. You gain 2 level 1 initiate spell slots to fuel these spells, which increase to level 2 spell slots at character level 7 as if you were a 1/3 caster. These spell slots restore on a long rest as usual, and are in addition to any spell slots you may already have. Your initiate spells use the highest spellcasting modifier you have between Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma for their checks if they have any. Choose between Conjuration, Enchantment, and Transmutation. Spells of this school that you cast are upcast as if they were the lower of 3 or 1/3 of your character level, regardless of which spell slot you use to fuel them. Druid's main form of offensive magic at these levels fill the Conjuration, Enchantment, and Transmutation themes, with one of them being an Evocation spell. Druid's got enough options here to make things interesting for them though, and these spells are almost certainly the main reason people choose the MI Druid feat anyway. I think this list is shaping up to be pretty decent with these changes though, and I love where Druid finds itself in this revamp. Number 5, Magic Initiate Warlock. Warlock is a fascinating class to theorize about, not so much when you get into the meat of their actual playstyle. Still, they have a widely appealing spell list of unique options to choose from, which actually adds flair to this feat in particular. Let's dive into the details. You learn 2 cantrips from the Warlock spell list. When you gain your 6th and then your 12th level, you learn an additional cantrip from the Warlock spell list of your choosing. These cantrips scale as usual. You gain 2 level 1 spells from the Warlock spell list. You gain 2 level 1 initiate spell slots to fuel these spells, which increase to level 2 spell slots at character level 7, as if you were a 1/3 caster such as an Eldritch Knight or an Arcane Trickster. These spell slots restore on a long rest as usual, and are in addition to any spell slots you may already have. Your initiate spells use your highest spellcasting modifier between Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma for their checks if they have any. Choose between Enchantment, Evocation, and Necromancy. Spells of this school that you cast are upcast as if they were the lower of 3 or 1/3 of your character level, regardless of which spell slot you use to fuel them. Warlock is all about control, destruction, and affliction, so this is perfect for it. Its spell list is also fairly unique, with things like Eldritch Blast, Armor of Agathis, and Arms of Hadar being some of the coolest things here, so it's likely to be chosen if any of these feats are. Absolutely a great new addition, and something I'd actually consider taking on a 1/3 caster, or even a non-caster. Number 6, Magic Initiate Wizard. There's only one reason that this MI feat didn't top the list previously, and it's because Cleric gets so many amazing spells and cantrips at level 1 that it was just not quite good enough. Still, it holds a prominent spot as the second best MI feat in the current game, for good reason. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. You learn 2 cantrips from the Wizard spell list. When you gain your 6th and then your 12th level, you learn an additional cantrip from the Wizard spell list of your choosing. These cantrips scale as usual. You gain 2 level 1 spells from the Wizard spell list. You gain 2 level 1 initiate spell slots to fuel these spells, which increase to level 2 spell slots at character level 7 as if you were a 1/3 caster. These spell slots restore on a long rest as usual and are in addition to any spell slots you may already have. Your initiate spells use the highest of your spellcasting modifiers between Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma for their checks, if they have any. Choose between Illusion, Necromancy, and Transmutation. Spells of the school that you cast are upcast as if they were the lower of 3 or 1/3 of your character level, regardless of which spell slot you use to fuel them. I'll admit fully, this one is the outlier. Wizard and Sorcerer are just too damn close, so I took it upon myself to intentionally nerf the Wizard one in certain regards to push it into line with the others. It's got so many spells and so much access that I went with the tropes to determine which ones I wanted here rather than the spell list, of which almost all are identical to the Sorcerer list. If you want upcasted Evocation, for example, you might as well go to the MI Sorcerer feat. It's still available for that, but aside from Necromancy, the rest would have just been a carbon copy of Sorc. Since this can be used with anyone though, it really helps multi-classing options and utility, which are the Wizard's theme anyway. I'm pleased with it as is. Number 7, Magic Initiate Cleric. We come to the final Magic Initiate feat in the list, reserved for the caster with the single most useful low-level spell and cantrip selection in the game. Cleric shines with unique, powerful cantrips and both impressive and late-game usable level 1 spells that can augment most any non-cleric build. We'll finish these MI feats off strong with the following. You learn 2 cantrips from the Cleric spell list. When you gain your 6th and then your 12th level, you learn an additional cantrip from the Cleric spell list of your choosing. These cantrips scale as usual. You gain 2 level 1 spells from the Cleric spell list. You gain 2 level 1 initiate spell slots to fuel these spells, which increase to level 2 spell slots at character level 7 as if you were a 1/3 caster. These spell slots restore on a long rest as usual and are in addition to any spell slots you may already have. Your initiate spells use your highest spellcasting modifier between Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma for their checks if they have any. Choose between Abjuration, Evocation, and Necromancy. Spells of this school that you cast are upcast as if they were the lower of 3 or 1/3 of your character level, regardless of which spell slot you use to fuel them. As I was going through this last one though, I started wondering, just as a theory craft, what would the Magic Initiate line look like if Paladin and Ranger were on it? I couldn't do the same for Eldritch Knight and Arcane Trickster since they just borrow directly from other spell lists, but the 2 half-caster classes actually have their own unique lists. You can skip ahead to number 8's chapter if you want, I'll link you a timestamp up here, but if you'd like to stick around for some theorizing with me, let's make those other 2 feats just for fun. Number Spanish Inquisition, Magic Initiate Paladin. Paladin's mostly defined by its admittedly unoriginal smiting abilities, but it has a lot of defensive utility that doesn't go overlooked. In fact, it's some of the strongest defensive spellcrafting in the whole game, so let's take a gander at what this feat would look like. You learn one cantrip from the cleric spell list. When you gain your 10th level, you learn an additional cantrip from the cleric spell list of your choosing. These cantrips scale as usual. You gain 2 level 1 spells from the paladin spell list. You gain 2 level 1 initiate spell slots to fuel these spells, which increase to level 2 spell slots at character level 7 as if you were a 1/3 caster. These spell slots restore on a long rest as usual and are in addition to any spell slots you may already have. Your initiate spells use your highest spellcasting modifier between intelligence, wisdom, and charisma for their checks if they have any. Choose between Abjuration, Enchantment, and Evocation. Spells of the school that you cast are upcast as if they were the lower of 3 or 1/3 of your character level, regardless of which spell slot you use to fuel them. I got somewhat creative with this one because paladins don't have cantrips. Rangers do not either, so you'll notice theirs as well. Try to take a guess at what their cantrips would come from. But generally speaking, the rest of the feat remains relatively the same. I think it's fair to reduce the amount of cantrips that you get, even halve the amount of cantrips that you get from the Paladin Magic Initiate feat, specifically because you're taking from 2 different spell lists. Besides, the real bread and butter of this one is probably just 1 or 2 of the cantrips anyway. The rest are just a bonus, and the upcasting perk from these revamped MI feats. By itself though, Paladin is an easy one to gauge because they only have 3 major spell schools. Their list is quite small, making this an easy feat. Number Animal Friendship, Magic Initiate Ranger. Ranger's spell list is unusually bereft of ambition, like somebody kinda forgot Ranger also does damage and likes to control the battlefield. It mainly consists of weak spells that can do a bit of work but hardly keep up in the later levels outside of a couple of incredible standouts. I think this feat would make such a spell list slightly more appealing to a character rather than having to multi-class into it though. You learn 1 cantrip from the Druid spell list. When you gain your 10th level, you learn an additional cantrip from the Druid spell list of your choosing. These cantrips scale as usual. You gain 2 level 1 spells from the Ranger spell list. You gain 2 level 1 initiate spell slots to fuel these spells, which increase to level 2 spell slots at character level 7 as if you were a 1/3 caster. These spell slots restore on a long rest as usual and are in addition to any spell slots you may already have. Your initiate spells use your highest spellcasting modifier between intelligence, wisdom, and charisma for their checks if they have any. Choose between Conjuration, Evocation, and Transmutation. Spells of this school that you cast are upcast as if they were the lower of 3 or 1/3 of your character level, regardless of which spell slot you use to fuel them. Now, who couldn't have guessed I would pick Druid for these? I understand that there's a little bit of dissonance about the fact that this is supposed to be an MI Ranger, and yet I'm also kind of multi-classing you into Druid, and the previous one being an MI Paladin, also multi-classing you into Cleric, but let's be real, it would be far less interesting if you didn't have some extra options. The Ranger list, like the Paladin list, is very basic and almost entirely plays around with 3 spell schools, making it easy to craft for this video. It's pretty interesting in terms of being able to shut someone down in the early to mid games, but as you'd expect, everything outside utility falls off real hard in the late game. Still, these feats are all about tweaking your build, not making it entirely. I like where this thought experiment ended up. Back to the real video. Number 8, Actor. I figured that fucking performer buff would come back to bite me. Wait, did I just say something similar in the video already? Whatever. Actor gives you +1 charisma and expertise and 2 skills. Hey, look at that. Expertise and 2 skills isn't actually overpowered, turns out. I'm in the clear, so I might as well make this more appealing since an actor isn't just their dialogue. Still, I probably should have added the acrobatic skill to Performer, so in light of hindsight, we'll just rename this feat since it's almost fucking identical to Performer in definition anyway. We're gonna call this feat Artist now and expand its functionality. You gain +1 to either Dexterity, Intelligence, or Charisma up to a maximum of 20. You gain proficiency in either Acrobatics, 1 Intelligence-based skill of your choosing, or Deception. If you already have proficiency in that skill, you gain Expertise instead. You also gain advantage on all performance checks. Once per long rest, if you succeed on a skill check using the chosen skill by rolling a natural 20, you gain Inspiration. If you would gain Inspiration, the effect is doubled. Anytime you fail a skill check with the chosen skill by rolling a natural 1, you may re-roll that check and use the second roll. This effect applies even if you had advantage on the first check, but it does not grant you a second advantage on the following roll. Okay, this one admittedly needs a bit of thinking outside the box. I dropped the double expertise since it was really only expertise and deception because performance sucks asshole as a skill, but kept the proficiency and expanded it massively to include many other forms of artistic expression. I even kept performance on with advantage since you're just so damned artistic now. I also added the intelligence skills because they're so abandoned, and once again, if you're an artist who's serious about their craft, you're very likely to know a lot about a niche subject. But the caveat at the end is special. If you create some piece of art and somebody loves it, you're on cloud 9. If you fail, you pick yourself up and try even harder next time. Your perseverance keeps you going. That's why I made this feat like I did, and it's finally interesting. Number 9, Crossbow Expert. Honestly, this one's weak. It's lame. It's not interesting in any way, and its impact is staggeringly low. I wish this feat was better than it is. Honestly, I do. But I would never take it right now in BG3, even if I decided to play a crossbow ranger, which I have many, many times. We've got to get the bandages out for this one because despite keeping some of it, it's just kinda junk right now. And we're gonna be doing something a little different. We're renaming this to Close Quarters Archery in honor of Nexus Mod's modder, Beninock's feat revamps. You no longer suffer disadvantage to attack rolls performed within melee range when you have a light or heavy crossbow, a short bow, or a long bow equipped. When you attack a target with a bow attack, but not a crossbow attack, while between 5 and 15 feet away from them, you may add your strength modifier to the attack and damage rolls instead of your dexterity if it is higher. We would add a caveat to this as well, where if you decided to attack somebody and you were within that radius, maybe your attack symbol would actually highlight in like a glowing yellow or orange or something, to showcase that you're actually within that range. When you attack a target with a crossbow attack while within 5 feet of them, you can smack them with the stock using a bonus action, dealing 1d4 damage and potentially dazing them. If you hit a target within 15 feet of you with a ranged attack, they have disadvantage on ranged attack rolls made during their next turn. It's not that Crossbow Expert was an unusable bad feat, but it wasn't anything special either. In fact, it's up there now for one of the lamest feats, though that list is pretty padded at this point. This actually kinda nerfs, kinda laterally promotes hand crossbows, but buffs everything else, adding options and not basing the entire feat on a single weapon action. It gives bow strength back to D&D, lets you utilize other crossbow types, and shuts down enemy ranged units with suppressive fire and superior tactics, because there is only one close quarters archer in this bitch, and that is you, my friend. This is how to revamp a feat to add something to both offense and defense categories. Number 10, Elemental Adept. This one barely made the list of underwhelming feats, mostly because the spells are good enough by themselves. Tuning up this feat might bust things, but right now an ability improvement kicks the shit out of Elemental Adept. We'll make a few changes, namely that you can only select this feat once and that it should be renamed to something like Ruin Spellcaster, mostly because that's what this feat is bound to do. When you deal damage with a spell or cantrip, that spell deals plus X damage, where X is equal to double the level of the spell slot used to cast it. Cantrips instead deal +1 damage at level 5 and an additional +1 damage at level 10, effectively putting cantrips on parity to some extent with level 1 spells cast using level 1 spell slots. Alright, let me explain the changes before you start blogging. The bump in damage is competitive with things like Great Weapon Master and Sharpshooter, adding bonus power to spells, but proportionate bonus damage to the fact that spells are a resource, while you can strike with impunity using physical weapons. To me, the bump is equivalent to about a 50% error in favor of the more limited spellcasters per action used on an attack, and their cantrips take a much smaller damage increment to make up for things. This absolutely makes the feat worth taking now, at least as worth it as Sharpshooter, Great Weapon Master, and Tavern Brawler are now. And that does it for the most underwhelming feats list. How do you think I did? Would you do anything differently? And most importantly, aren't I objectively right in how these feats should be remodeled for an ideal BG3 experience? I bet I am. And unless you tell me otherwise in the comments, I'll let my ego carry me to the end of this video. Until next time, where we finally close out the feat revamps with the most interesting list I made, that being the most synergistic feats linked in the description for your viewing pleasure, I'm a get up out of this bitch, but you take care and bye-bye for now.